Guten Tag. That's it for my German. I'm here today to speak to you about our legislation, the Act, and its purpose, what the requirements of the Act are in terms of the process, what are the employer's obligations under the Act, and then I'll speak a little bit about the work of our commission and how we enforce the Act. And if we have some time for questions, we can talk about some of our successes and some of the current challenges. So before we talk about the Act, we have to put the Act into context. We know that gender stereotypes and societal customs have very much influenced how our roles, both men and women's roles at home and at work, have developed. The gender wage gap is simply evidence that women continue to face significant barriers at work. One of these barriers is the discrimination that women face when they are hired, how they progress through work, and how they are compensated. So in Ontario, we have a number of laws that deal with the various aspects of discrimination, and these laws have developed at different periods of time, which is why they are in different pieces. We have the Employment Standards Act, which was enacted in 1951, and that is equal pay for equal work. We have the Human Rights Act, which was enacted in 1962, and that covers general discrimination at work. And then we have the Pay Equity Act, which was enacted in 1987. We also have other programs offered through the government that look at other initiatives to break down these barriers. Some of these are programs that encourage women to think about non-traditional work, programs to address domestic violence, because we know that that has a dramatic effect on women at work, and maternity and caregiver leave programs. So, what is the Pay Equity Act? Its purpose is to redress the systemic discrimination in individual workplaces that undervalue all employees, male and female, who perform jobs that are classified as female-dominated. It's important to note that the Act does not cover all forms of workplace discrimination. It is geared simply to the valuation system of the work. Who must comply with the legislation? All provincially regulated employers in Ontario who are in the public sector, and that includes the government, and all private sector employers who, since 1988, have had at least 10 employees or more. So what is pay equity? Pay equity is equal pay for work of equal or comparable value. Some people call it comparable worth. That's what it's called in the United States. We call it pay equity in Ontario. So what essentially pay equity does is, if the jobs usually done by women are equal or comparable in value to the jobs usually done by men, they must be paid at least the same. So what pay equity does is it requires comparing jobs done by women to different jobs done by men. It's a difficult concept. So the general requirements of the Act are contained in sections 7.1 and 7.2, and that is that every employer must establish and maintain is the key word there, compensation practices that provide for pay equity in every one of their establishments. And each of these terms is defined in the Act. And then in subsection 2, no employer or bargaining agent shall bargain for or agree to compensation practices that, if adopted, would cause a contravention of the Act. So the bargaining agent also has a responsibility under our Act. So when does this obligation arise? Our act is self-managed. What that means is that the employer, it is up to the employer to ensure that they are complying with the act by having the compensation practices that provide for pay equity. Our system does not rely on an employee complaining to the commission. The obligation as well is ongoing, so it means that employers have to regularly assess their compensation practices when things change or new jobs get introduced to ensure that they are in continuous compliance. So for a private sector employer, it means that as soon as they hire their 10th employee, they must look at their compensation practices and make the necessary adjustments. And for public sector employers, the obligation arises immediately upon being set up. So the requirements of the Act, these are compulsory requirements. There's no discretion in whether you do this or not. The system must show that it is capable of determining the job classes by making the gender analysis of the class and establishing what the job rate is for the class. The value of the job must be based on skill, effort, responsibility, and working conditions. Once you have your valuation of both the male jobs and the female jobs, you must conduct comparisons using there are 3 methods in the Act, and I'll explain those in a moment. And then where the jobs are comparable, if the female job class's job rate is lower than the comparable male rate, the wages must be adjusted upward. So the steps are a little bit complicated because you have to go through and you have to determine who is the employer. You have to look at the corporate structure to see who is going to be liable for doing pay equity. You must determine what the establishment is. You must then group similar jobs, similar positions into these job classes and determine their gender. You have to go through a evaluation system, a comparison, adjustments, and then you have to maintain your system so that you make sure that these gaps do not open again. So what employees are covered? All full-time employers, part-time employers, seasonal workers, students working on a part-time basis if they are going to school, all management and all executive level positions. The only employees who are not covered are casual workers and students who are working simply during their vacation time. And all of these are defined in the Act. So what is an establishment? In Ontario, companies have establishments in various parts of the province. So they have to have pay equity for each of the establishments. And an establishment must cover all of the employees in the particular location. The establishment also has the option of using one criteria for all of their employees in the entire province. They don't have to break it up if they don't want to. That is a discretionary piece. So in terms of what is a job class is also defined, and it is a job class where the positions have similar duties and responsibilities, similar qualifications, a similar recruiting process, and the same compensation schedule, salary grade, or range of salaries. So in determining gender of the job class, again, this is defined by the Act. If the class is filled by 60% of females, then it is a female job class, and a male job class is 70% of employees who are male. The other two tests, if the numbers don't quite work, is historical incumbency. In other words, what was the history of this job in that particular workplace? Who held it? And again, if that doesn't answer the question, then you can go to the usual gender stereotype, and there are tests that allow you to make that assessment. And if none of these criteria apply, then the job is considered to be gender neutral, and it is not valued or considered for pay equity purposes. So there are two main ways to compare jobs. First is the job-to-job method, which is a direct comparison between a male job class and a female job class. Lots of times, however, that's not possible to do, and so the other methodology is called proportional value, and that is an indirect comparison where you choose job classes, male job classes. Essentially, you plot them on a wage line, and then you plot the female job classes, and you raise all of the wages of the female job classes that fall below the wage line. Job rate. The job rate that is being considered is the top job rate for that particular job class. And compensation, when you're looking at the job rate, includes it includes salaries as well as all benefits. You may have a job class where, for instance, the employer may pay for a uniform, and that would be considered a benefit, and that would be included into the job rate. The Act allows for some differences to exist. So if employers have a formal seniority system, a formal merit system, if they are hiring because there are temporary skills shortages in a particular area, the wage differential may be allowable, temporary training assignments, and something called red circling. But the employer must prove that these exist. It's not just at their word. They have to have some evidence of that. In terms of adjustments, the wage adjustments are required to be done retroactive to the date when the female job class was created. And the employers have to show evidence that they have actually paid this liability. Financial hardship is not a defense in our office for noncompliance. So I'll talk a little bit about our agency. The Pay Equity Commission is an independent agency of the Ministry of Labor. We are independent because the government is required to do pay equity as well. So we will get complaints, for instance, from ministry employees, and we will have to investigate them, which is why we're independent. But we report through the Minister of Labor. We have two sections to the Commission. The Pay Equity Office, and the office is responsible for the enforcement of the Act. So we have review officers who are legislated to do the investigations. And then we have the Pay Equity Hearings Tribunal, and that is the adjudicative arm of the Commission. So what happens there is if one of our officers makes an order and that order is not complied with, we would send it to the tribunal, and the tribunal would simply endorse the order. If the parties are unhappy with the order, they can take the order to the tribunal, and the tribunal would then hold a hearing. And it would look at the investigation and the order, just like any other adjudicated body. So in terms of our office, excuse me, our office handles complaints. So anyone, any employer, employee, union can come to our office and complain about an employer, in which case we would conduct an investigation and make the necessary orders. We also do monitoring. I don't know, you don't have a German word for monitoring. It's like an audit. It's like an audit. So we have the power to just call up employers and say, what have you done for pay equity? And they would have to show us their compensation system. And if we're not satisfied with that, we could enter into their premises. We can order them to produce documentation. We can interview their staff. We can attend at their establishment and conduct our own investigation, regardless of a complaint coming in or not. And we do, most of our work actually is done through monitoring. Complaints are not very high in our office. It's very difficult for an employee to complain in a workplace, as we all know. I see some people nodding their heads. We also do a lot of education and outreach. We have live webinars. We will conduct a training session on whatever topic that we're asked to educate people on. We have over time produced a number of very good self-guided resources for employers. We have interactive material, so employers can actually go online and we can take them through a self-guided series of modules. And at the end of that system, they can put in their own data from their own enterprise and produce what the results would be. We also make submissions to government regularly on pay equity and related topics. So equal pay day, the gender wage gap, all of those things are things that we talk to government about regularly. And finally, the government in Ontario has made it a priority to address the gender wage gap, and they have just, in April, appointed a 4-person steering committee. I'm on that steering committee, as is a representative of BPW, actually. And there are 4 of us, and we are traveling the province, and we are going to be making recommendations to government in the spring about all of the various things that they should be implementing in order to address the gender wage gap. And I think that's the end.
That's it.